Jack had always considered himself a simple man, a soldier in the vast expanse of space. He wasn't a hero, just a member of the fleet that protected the human colonies. His mission was always clear: follow orders and survive. He never imagined that one day his life would change because of an alien princess. It had started like any other mission. The Galactic Coalition had sent Jack and his team to a distant planet. On the edge of known space, the planet's atmosphere was harsh, the ground was rocky, and the air was thin. The inhabitants, a hostile alien species known as the Zorth, had been causing trouble on nearby human colonies. It wasn't a big job, just another patrol. But things quickly went wrong. As Jack's team entered the jungle of the alien world, an ambush caught them by surprise. The Zorth were quick, using the terrain to their advantage. Jack's squad fought back fiercely, but they were outnumbered. In the chaos of the battle, Jack found himself separated from his team, alone in the dense woods. He tried to reach his squad's position, but the radio was down, and the environment made navigation nearly impossible. As Jack trudged through the thick underbrush, he stumbled upon something unexpected: a hidden outpost. It wasn't military. It wasn't even Zorth. It was an ancient-looking structure, half buried by time and dirt, with markings Jack had never seen before. Curiosity pushed him forward, and that's when he saw her. She was kneeling in front of the entrance, her hands bound with strange glowing chains. Her long, silver hair cascaded down her back, and her eyes were closed as if she were meditating. Jack didn't know what to think. She wasn't like any alien species he had ever seen. Her skin had a soft glow to it, and her features were delicate, yet strong. She looked like she had been through hell. Jack took a step closer, and she suddenly opened her eyes, locking onto his. Her gaze was intense, filled with both fear and hope. Jack froze. His heart skipped a beat. She was beautiful, but it wasn't just her appearance that caught him. It was the way she looked at him, like she had been waiting for something. "Please," she whispered, her voice weak but clear. "Help me." Jack hesitated. He had no idea who she was or why she was here, but he couldn't just leave her. He stepped forward, unsure of how to approach. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice gruff from the dust and sweat of the battle. "My name is Zora," she said softly. "I'm not from here. I've been held captive by the Zorth. Please, I need your help." Jack's mind raced. The Zorth were ruthless, and if they had this woman in captivity, it meant she was important, perhaps even dangerous. He wasn't sure what kind of danger he was walking into, but he couldn't just leave her behind. Something about her, something in her eyes, told him she wasn't a threat. He knelt beside her, carefully examining the glowing chains that bound her wrists. "How did you end up here?" Zora looked down at the chains, her expression pained. "The Zorth captured me years ago. I am the last of my kind, a princess from a dying world. They kept me here as leverage, hoping to use me in their negotiations. But I can't go back to them." Jack's heart softened. She wasn't just any captive. She was a princess, and her people had abandoned her. It wasn't the first time he had encountered the consequences of war, but hearing Zora's story made it feel personal. "I'll get you out of here," Jack said. Determined, he reached into his pack. Pulling out a small knife, he worked quickly, cutting the chains that held her. As the last chain fell away, Zora looked up at him, her eyes wide with gratitude. You would help me?" she asked, her voice filled with disbelief. "I don't leave people behind," Jack replied, standing up and offering his hand. "Let's get you out of here." Zora took his hand, and Jack helped her to her feet. She winced slightly, her legs weak from years of captivity, but she didn't pull away. "Thank you," she whispered again, her voice trembling. Jack wasn't sure what he had gotten himself into, but he knew one thing: he couldn't turn back now. He had just rescued a princess from a dangerous enemy, and as much as he wanted to return to his mission, he knew that Zora needed him more than anyone else. "We'll find a way out of here," Jack said, scanning the area. The sounds of the battle were still echoing in the distance. His squad was out there, and he had to reunite with them. But first, he had to get Zora to safety. Zora nodded, her grip tightening on his hand. "I don't know what I'll do without you." Jack didn't know what to say. He was just a soldier. But something about her words stirred something deep. Inside him, a feeling he had never expected to experience. He was her rescuer, but in that moment, he couldn't help but feel that he wasn't over his head. Together, they moved through the jungle, Jack leading the way, with Zora following closely. Behind, she had no one left, and Jack, despite his doubts, had a strange feeling that their paths had crossed for a reason. Whatever happened next, he knew one thing for sure: he couldn't leave her side. Jack and Zora moved quietly through the dense jungle, the sounds of battle slowly fading into the background. Jack's mind raced. He was a soldier, trained to handle enemies, to follow orders. But nothing in his training had prepared him for this moment. He had never expected to be running through an alien jungle with a royal princess at his side. A princess who had no home, no allies, and no future with her people. As they walked, Jack couldn't help but glance at Zora. She was beautiful, with her silver hair flowing like liquid light, and her pale skin seemed to shimmer in the shadows of the jungle. But it wasn't just her appearance that caught his attention, it was the sadness in her eyes. She had been a prisoner for years, and it was clear that being free wasn't as simple as escaping her chains. She had been through so much, and yet, she was still standing, still fighting. "Where are we going?" Zora's voice interrupted his thoughts. Her voice was soft, but there was a sense of urgency behind it. "We need to find my squad," Jack replied, his tone firm. "They'll be looking for me, and we can't stay here. Once we're with them, we'll figure out what to do next." Zora nodded, but Jack could tell she wasn't fully convinced. She had been running for so long, with no real plan or direction. Jack could see the doubt in her eyes, but she didn't voice it. Instead, she followed him, her steps slow but steady. As they continued through the jungle, Jack couldn't help but notice how silent everything was. The battle had died down, and the usual sounds of wildlife were eerily absent. It was as if the jungle itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Jack felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He was out of his element, and every step felt like a risk. "We're not far from where my team should be," Jack said, trying to reassure both Zora and himself. "We'll be safe soon." Zora glanced at him, her expression a mixture of fear and curiosity. "What will happen when they see me?" she asked quietly. "Will they help me?" Jack paused for a moment, unsure of how to answer. "My squad is loyal to humanity," he said carefully. "They won't hurt you, but things will be complicated. The Zorth are still looking for you, and they won't stop until they find you. They've been hunting you for years." Zora's face darkened at the mention of the Zorth. She stopped walking for a moment, her gaze distant as if she were remembering something painful. Jack could see the weight of the past on her shoulders, the fear of being hunted, and the burden of being the last of her kind. "I never wanted to be their weapon," Zora said quietly, her voice filled with regret. "But I had no choice. My people wanted power, and they thought they could use me to get it. But now, I'm nothing to them." Jack turned to face her, his expression softening. "You're not nothing. You're more than that. You don't have to be a weapon. You're free now." Zora looked at him, her eyes searching his face as if trying to understand what he meant. There was a long silence between them before she spoke again. "How do you do it?" she asked. "How do you keep going when everything is falling apart?" Jack didn't have an easy answer for her. He wasn't a philosopher, and he had never been one to dwell on deep questions. He was a soldier, trained to fight, survive, and protect. But Zora's question made him think, made him question the very purpose of his existence. Why did he keep going? "I guess I keep going because I have to," Jack said after a long pause. "Because if I don't, then everything I've done will be for nothing. I don't have the luxury of giving up, and neither do you." Zora's eyes softened, and for the first time, Jack saw a flicker of hope in them. She was still broken, still haunted by her past, but in that moment, Jack could see that she was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a future for her outside of the chains that had bound her for so long. They walked for hours, the jungle stretching endlessly around them. Jack kept his senses alert, his eyes scanning the trees and the shadows for any sign of danger. But the longer they walked, the more Jack realized how much he had come to rely on Zora. She was no longer just a princess to him. She was a person who needed help, and he was the only one who could give it to her. Finally, as the sun began to set, they reached a clearing. Jack could see his squad in the distance, their silhouettes outlined against the dimming sky. His heart lifted with relief, but that relief was short-lived. As they approached, Jack noticed something was wrong. His squad wasn't looking at him with the usual familiarity. They were tense, their weapons ready, and their eyes were filled with suspicion. Jack felt Zora tense beside him. She cowled. He sensed the change in the air too. "Jack, who's that?" One of his teammates, a tall man named Alex, called out, his voice sharp. "You've brought an alien with you?" Jack stepped forward, holding up his hands to show he meant no harm. "She's not a threat," he said, his voice steady. "Her name is Zora. She's not with the Zorth." The soldiers hesitated, their eyes moving from Jack to Zora. Jack knew it would take more than just words to convince them. But in that moment, he didn't care. He had made a promise to protect Zora, and he wasn't going to break it now. "Zora's not a weapon," Jack said firmly. "She's a person, and she's not going back to the Zorth. Not while I'm here." Zora looked at Jack, her eyes wide with uncertainty. She had no idea what would happen next, but for the first time in years, she felt like she might have a chance at something more than just survival. The tension in the air was thick as Jack stood between his squad and Zora. The soldiers were unsure, their eyes shifting from Jack to the alien princess who stood beside him. Zora looked out of place, her royal appearance contrasting with the ruggedness of the humans around her. Jack knew this was a moment of truth. He had to convince them that Zora was not their enemy, that she was just as much a victim as anyone else. "I know this is hard to understand," Jack said, stepping forward, his voice steady. "But Zora isn't like the others. She's not one of the Zorth soldiers. She's a princess, and she's been held captive by them for years. She's not the enemy." There was a long silence as Jack's words hung in the air. His squad was not convinced. They were trained to be cautious, to question everything, especially when it came to the unknown. "Jack, I don't know about this," Alex, the tall soldier who had spoken earlier, said, his tone skeptical. "We don't know her. We don't know anything about her. She could be lying. She could be leading us into a trap." Jack turned to Alex, his expression firm. "She's not lying. I've seen what the Zorth did to her. She's not our enemy. Alex, she's just trying to survive." Zora looked down at the ground, her face filled with uncertainty. Jack could see how hard this was for her. She had no place to go, no allies, and no reason to trust anyone, especially humans. But she had nowhere else to turn. "Please," Zora whispered, her voice barely audible. "I just want to be free. I don't want to fight anymore. I don't want to be a tool for their wars." Jack placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. He knew the weight of her words, the pain behind them. She wasn't just asking for freedom, she was asking for a chance at a life beyond the chains that had bound her for so long. He couldn't deny her that chance. After a few moments, Alex sighed and lowered his weapon, his expression still unsure. "All right, Jack, we'll give her a chance, but you're taking full responsibility for this." "I'll take full responsibility," Jack promised, with a nod. Alex motioned for the rest of the squad to lower their weapons. The tension began to ease. But Jack knew this was only the beginning. They were still far from safe, and Zora's presence was bound to cause more problems in the future. But for now, they had made it through this first test. The group set up camp for the night. Jack and his squad moved quickly, securing the area and making sure they were hidden from any potential threats. Zora, still uncertain, sat quietly by the fire, her eyes distant. Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of protectiveness toward her. She was out of her element, just like he was, and they both needed to find their way through this dangerous world. As the fire crackled, Jack approached her cautiously. "You're safe here," he said softly, sitting down beside her. "No one will hurt you." Zora glanced at him, her eyes filled with both gratitude and fear. "I don't know how to be safe." She confessed, "I've never been safe. I don't know what it's like to not have to run, to not have to hide." Jack's heart went out to her. He had no answers for her, no way to make her past disappear. But he knew one thing: he wouldn't let her face it alone. Not while he was around. "I can't change what's happened to you," Jack said, his voice sincere. "But I can promise you this: you're not alone anymore. I'll keep you safe." Zora looked at him for a long moment, as if searching for something in his eyes. Then, finally, she nodded. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Jack's chest tightened at her words, but he didn't know how to respond. He had never been good with emotions, especially when it came to matters of the heart. But Zora wasn't just any woman. She wasn't just some distant princess from a far-off world. She was someone who had been through unimaginable pain and loss. And Jack had been the one to help her find a glimmer of hope. As the night wore on, the squad settled down to rest. Jack kept watch, his mind alert for any sign of danger. Zora had fallen into a restless sleep beside him, her breathing steady but shallow. He couldn't help but notice how vulnerable she looked, how small and fragile in this strange, foreign world. Jack didn't know what the future held for them, but for the first time since he met her, he allowed himself to imagine a life where he wasn't just a soldier, fighting in a never-ending war. A life where he could be more than that, where he could protect someone who needed him. The next morning, Jack and his squad set out again, determined to find a way to get Zora to safety. They still had no idea where to go or who could be trusted, but Jack wasn't about to give up. Zora had already been through too much to let her fall back into the hands of the Zorth. As they trekked through the jungle, Jack kept a close eye on Zora. She was still distant, still lost in her own thoughts, but he could see that she was starting to trust him. It was a small step, but it was something. And in this war-torn galaxy, sometimes small steps were all you had. Zora had already lost everything: her planet, her people, her past, but she hadn't lost herself. Not yet, and Jack was determined to make sure she never did. The journey through the dense jungle was becoming more difficult with each passing day. Jack's squad was moving cautiously, staying alert for any signs of danger, while Zora kept a careful distance behind him. She was trying to adjust to her new reality, but the pain of her past was still fresh in her eyes. Jack could see that she was struggling, even if she didn't say anything. He could only imagine how overwhelming it must be for her freedom, after so many years of captivity, but also the fear of what came next. Jack had grown used to being a soldier, dealing with the chaos of battle, the constant risk of death, and the cold weight of responsibility. But this was different. He wasn't just protecting his comrades now. He was protecting Zora, a princess from a species he barely understood. And though he had promised to keep her safe, Jack didn't know how to navigate the uncertainties of what was ahead. As they trudged through the jungle, Jack took a moment to look back at Zora. She had stopped for a brief moment to adjust the straps on her pack, her face strained. She wasn't used to the weight of the journey, both physically and emotionally. "Are you okay?" Jack asked, his voice low but concerned. Zora looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "I'm fine," she replied quickly, her words a little too sharp. Jack didn't press her. He had learned by now that Zora preferred to keep her emotions hidden. It was clear that she didn't want to burden anyone, especially not him. But Jack couldn't help but feel like he was failing her. She had lost everything: her people, her planet's hand. Now she was forced to travel with strangers who couldn't truly understand what she had been through. The group continued to move forward, the jungle thick with the sound of distant animals. Jack's squad was quiet, each of them focused on their task. The journey was exhausting, but they had no choice but to keep moving. Every hour spent in the jungle brought them closer to finding a safe place for Zora, but they couldn't afford to stop for long. As the day wore on, the group finally reached the edge of the jungle, where the trees began to thin out, revealing a wide open plain. Jack's squad halted, their eyes scanning the horizon for any signs of danger. The plain seemed peaceful enough, but Jack knew that peace was often a disguise in this part of the galaxy. "We'll camp here for the "Nine," Jack said, his voice firm. "Keep your guard up. We don't know what's out there." Zora, who had been following quietly behind, looked out over the plain with a sense of unease. She had been used to the safety of her palace, surrounded by guards and power, not the open wilderness where danger could strike at any moment. She felt vulnerable here, and though she hadn't spoken about it, Jack could sense the fear in her as night fell. The group set up camp and started a small fire. Jack kept a close eye on Zora, who was sitting near the fire, her gaze distant. She hadn't spoken much since they had left the jungle, and Jack was beginning to worry. Zora had always been a bit closed off, but tonight, she seemed even more distant than usual. After a while, Jack approached her, sitting down beside her by the fire. "You're not alone, Zora," he said quietly, trying to ease the tension that had settled between them. "You don't have to carry all of this by yourself." Zora didn't respond immediately. She was staring into the fire, her expression hard to read. Finally, after a long silence, she spoke. "I never asked for any of this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never wanted to be a pawn in a war, never wanted to be used for power. But now, I don't know what's left for me. My people are gone, and my planet is destroyed, and I'm just lost." Jack's heart went out to her. He had never been royalty, never had the kind of power Zora had once known. But he understood the feeling of being lost, of having everything turned upside down. "You're not lost, Zora," Jack said gently. "You survived this far, and you're stronger than you think." Zora shook her head, her eyes glistening with tears. "Surviving doesn't feel like living. I've been running from one thing or another for so long. I don't know what it means to have a future." Jack didn't know how to answer. He had no answers for her, no magic words to take away the pain of her past. But he knew one thing for sure. He wouldn't give up on her. He couldn't. She had become more than just a mission to him. She had become a person he cared about deeply, someone he wanted to protect, no matter the cost. "Maybe you don't have to have all the answers right now," Jack said, his voice steady. "But you're not alone anymore. You have a future, Zora, and whatever happens, I'll be here with you." Zora turned to him then, her eyes searching his face for something she hadn't seen before. It was a look of uncertainty, but also something else, hope. Jack wasn't sure if she truly believed his words, but he saw a glimmer of something in her eyes that made him think that, maybe, just maybe, she was starting to believe in herself again. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. The night was still, the only sound the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. Jack couldn't know what the future held for them, but in that moment, he knew that he had made the right choice. Helping Zora wasn't just a mission, it was something deeper, something that felt like destiny. As the fire burned down to embers, Jack stood up, ready to take his turn at watch. Zora followed his movement, and for the first time in days, she gave him a small, quiet smile. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind Jack that they were making progress. The journey ahead would be difficult. They would face more enemies, more challenges, but Jack was beginning to believe that, together, they could overcome anything. The days that followed were long and filled with uncertainty. Jack's squad continued to move through the rugged landscape, staying on alert for any signs of danger. Zora had grown quieter, and Jack could see that she was starting to retreat further into herself. It was as if the weight of everything that had happened to her, the loss of her planet, her people, her freedom, was beginning to catch up with her. At night, she would sit by the fire, her eyes distant as she stared at the flames, lost in thought. Jack knew that there was little he could do to erase her pain, but he kept his promise. He stayed by her side, offering comfort when he could, and making sure that the dangers of the galaxy didn't get any closer. But even as Jack did everything he could to protect Zora, the reality of their situation began to settle in. They were still far from safety. The Zorth were still hunting her, and Jack's squad was far from home. Every step they took felt like a step closer to something they couldn't see, a future they couldn't predict. One afternoon, as they were making their way through a dense forest, Jack noticed that Zora had slowed down. She was lagging behind the group, her steps faltering as she tripped over a rock. Jack quickly moved to her side, offering his arm to help her up. Zora, are you okay? He asked gently. Zora nodded, but Jack could see the exhaustion in her eyes. She hadn't been eating well, and her strength was fading. She had been through so much, and it was beginning to show. I'm fine, Zora replied, her voice quieter than usual. But Jack could tell she was lying. Her body was struggling to keep up, and her spirit seemed to be fading. You don't look fine, Jack said, his concern growing. You need rest. We can't keep going like this. Zora shook her head. We don't have time for rest. We can't stop now. I can't keep you all waiting. Jack looked at her, his expression softening. Zora, you don't have to do this alone. We're all in this together. If you need rest, we'll stop. We'll find a safe place for you. Zora's eyes flickered with something like fear. I can't stop. I can't show weakness. If I do, they'll find me. They'll come for me. Jack's heart ached for her. He could hear the desperation in her voice, the deep-rooted fear that she had carried for so long. She didn't know what it meant to be safe anymore. She had been running from the Zorth for so long that the thought of rest, of taking a break, felt impossible. You don't have to be strong all the time, Zora, Jack said, his voice soft but firm. You're not alone anymore. We're here for you. You don't have to carry this burden by yourself. Zora hesitated, and for a moment, Jack thought she might pull away. But then, slowly, she let out a breath and looked up at him. I don't know how to stop. I've never known how to stop. Jack offered her a reassuring smile. We'll teach you. One step at a time. Zora didn't say anything more, but Jack could see the shift in her. It wasn't much, but it was something. She was beginning to trust him, beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for her to stop running, to start living again. They made camp early that night, and Jack's squad set up a makeshift shelter, keeping watch for any approaching dangers. Zora, however, seemed to relax a little. She lay down on the ground beside the fire, her eyes closing as she tried to sleep. For the first time in days, she seemed at peace. Jack sat near the fire, his eyes scanning the darkened forest around them. He couldn't help but feel a sense of responsibility for Zora, a need to protect her. Even as he struggled with the weight of his own doubts, he didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let her face it alone. As the night deepened, Jack heard a rustling sound in the distance. His senses went on high alert, and he quickly moved to the edge of the camp, signaling for his squad to stay quiet. Zora was still asleep, her breathing steady. Jack's hand went to the rifle slung over his shoulder, his fingers tight around the grip. Stay alert, Jack whispered to his squad, his eyes darting through the shadows. We've got company. It wasn't long before a group of Zorth soldiers emerged from the trees, their silhouettes barely visible in the darkness. Jack's heart raced, but he kept his cool. He couldn't let the Zorth take Zora, not after everything she had been through. Get ready, Jack said, his voice low. His squad moved into position, ready to fight, but Jack's mind was focused solely on protecting Zora. He couldn't afford to lose her now, not after everything they had been through. He could hear the soldiers getting closer, their heavy footsteps echoing through the trees. Jack glanced at Zora, still asleep beside the fire, unaware of the danger creeping closer. He knew he had to act fast. He signaled to his squad, and they moved into position, their weapons drawn. We won't let them take her, Jack whispered. With a final glance at Zora, Jack and his squad sprang into action. The Zorth soldiers were no match for the well-trained humans, and within moments, the threat was neutralized. Jack stood over the fallen soldiers, his breathing heavy but controlled. He turned back to the fire, his eyes scanning the camp for any signs of danger. Zora had stirred in her sleep but hadn't woken up. Jack let out a sigh of relief. She was safe, for now. He walked over to her and knelt down, gently shaking her shoulder. Zora, he whispered, wake up. It's safe. Zora's eyes opened slowly, her gaze a little unfocused at first when she saw Jack's face. Her expression softened. What happened? Jack smiled, offering her a hand. You're safe. We handled it. Zora blinked in surprise, her eyes widening as she realized what had just happened. She was safe. For the first time in a long while, she didn't have to run. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I don't know what to say. Jack smiled gently. You don't have to say anything. We're all in this together. Zora nodded, her eyes meeting his. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she could have a future after all. The days after the attack felt both longer and shorter, as if time itself was bending under the pressure of their journey. Zora had become quieter, more withdrawn than ever before. The brief moments of calm she had shared with Jack were fading, replaced with a deep, silent exhaustion. Jack could see it in her eyes, the fear and uncertainty that never truly left her. They had to keep moving. The Zorth were still out there, and Jack knew it was only a matter of time before they found them again. But Jack wasn't sure how much more Zora could take. She had been through too much, and he could see that every step she took was becoming more difficult. She had never known peace, and the constant stress was starting to wear on her. One evening, as the squad set up camp near the edge of a thick forest, Jack noticed Zora standing by herself, staring into the distance. Her face was expressionless, but there was a tension in her posture, as if she were bracing for something. Jack walked over to her, his boots crunching on the dry leaves beneath his feet. Zora? He called softly, not wanting to startle her. She turned her head slowly, her eyes distant and unreadable. I'm fine, she said quietly, her voice carrying the familiar weight of someone who didn't want to be bothered. Jack could tell she wasn't fine. Her shoulders were tense, her body stiff, and the usual grace she had carried with her was gone. She looked like a woman who had been through too much for too long, and now she was barely holding herself together. You don't have to pretend with me, Jack said gently, his voice low. I can see it. You're not fine. Zora's eyes flickered with a flash of emotion, but she quickly looked away, turning her gaze back to the horizon. What do you want me to say? She asked, her voice tight. That I'm scared? That I don't know what's going to happen next? That I don't know how to live with what's happened to me? Jack hesitated, his heart aching for her. He wasn't sure what to say, what words could fix the brokenness she carried. But he knew he couldn't let her face it alone. I can't change your past, Zora, Jack said, his voice soft, but I can promise you that I'm here for you, and I'm not going anywhere. You don't have to fight this alone. Zora didn't say anything for a long time. Her eyes were still focused on the distant trees, but Jack could see her breath catch slightly, as if she were holding back tears. After a long silence, she finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. I don't know how to stop, she confessed. I've been running for so long. I don't even know what it's like to be still, to just be, and I'm afraid that if I stop, if I let my guard down, everything will fall apart. Jack stepped closer, careful not to invade her space, but close enough to show his support. You don't have to have all the answers right now, he said softly, but you don't have to be strong all the time. You can stop, you can rest. You've been through more than anyone should ever have to bear. Zora finally turned her gaze toward him, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. You really think I can rest? She asked, her voice cracking slightly. You think I can just let go of everything? Jack nodded, his expression steady. I don't think you can just let go of everything in a moment, but I believe you can find peace one step at a time, and I'll be here to help you every step of the way. Zora's eyes softened, the walls she had built around herself starting to crumble just a little. She didn't say anything for a moment, but Jack could see the tiniest hint of something in her eyes. Hope. The next morning, the squad moved out early, continuing their journey deeper into the unknown regions of space. Zora walked a little slower than before, but Jack noticed something different in her now. She didn't walk with the same tension that had defined her movements for so long. She was still cautious, still carrying the weight of her past, but for the first time, she seemed a little lighter as they marched through the rocky terrain. Jack kept a close eye on Zora. She had stopped speaking as much, but he could see her mind was at work, It wasn't just the fear of being hunted by the Zorth anymore. She was fighting with herself, trying to figure out who she was now that her entire world had been destroyed. Jack understood that struggle better than most. He had been trained to fight, to survive, but Zora had never been trained for this. She had never been taught how to live after losing everything. In the afternoon, as they were setting up camp again, Jack noticed Zora staring at a distant mountain range, her face thoughtful. He walked over to her, taking a seat beside her. "Do you ever wonder what's next?" she asked, her voice soft. "What happens after all of this is over?" Jack looked out at the mountains with her, his gaze distant. "I used to wonder a lot," he admitted, "but now I just take it one day at a time. I've learned that sometimes the future isn't something you can plan. You just have to keep moving forward and trust that the rest will come." Zora nodded slowly, processing his words. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," she said quietly. "But maybe I'm starting to believe that there could be something more out there for me." Jack smiled, giving her a reassuring glance. "You don't have to be ready today, but you're not alone. Whatever happens, we'll face it together." Zora's eyes met his, and for the first time in a long time, Jack saw something like peace in her gaze. It wasn't a complete sense of calm, but it was enough to give Jack hope. They still had a long way to go. There were still battles to fight, enemies to face, and choices to make. But for the first time, Zora wasn't just running. She was beginning to live again. The following days were filled with constant movement. Jack and his squad had learned to stay ahead of the Zorth, carefully navigating through forests and rocky hills, always on the lookout for any sign of pursuit. The pressure never seemed to let up. The quiet moments were few and far between, and Jack could feel the strain in everyone's shoulders. The farther they moved from the Zorth's influence, the more Jack could sense a shift in the atmosphere. Something had changed in Zora. She had started to walk with more purpose, no longer dragging her feet or looking over her shoulder constantly. Her eyes, once clouded with fear, now held something else. It was still cautious, still unsure, but it was hope. Jack could see it in her every step. She was starting to believe again. One evening, as the squad settled into camp, Jack noticed that Zora had once again found herself alone, this time by the edge of a small stream. Her gaze was fixed on the water, and she looked more at peace than she had in days. Jack watched her from a distance, not wanting to disturb her, but something in the stillness of the moment told him that this was the time to finally ask her what he had been wondering for so long. He walked slowly to where she sat, careful not to startle her. As he reached her, Zora looked up, her eyes softening when they met his. "Mind if I sit?" Jack asked gently. Zora smiled faintly, motioning for him to join her. Of course, Jack sat beside her, the sound of the stream filling the silence between them. The fire from their camp crackled behind them, but here by the water, everything felt peaceful, almost serene. "I've been meaning to ask you something," Jack said, his voice quiet. Almost hesitant, Zora turned to him, her expression curious. "What's that?" Jack hesitated for a moment, searching for the right words. "You've been through so much, Zora. You've lost everything, your people, your home. But through all of it, you've kept going. You survived. I guess I just want to know how. How do you keep moving forward even when it seems like everything is falling apart?" Zora was silent for a long time, her eyes dropping to the water as she thought. For a moment, Jack wondered if she would answer at all. But then, slowly, she spoke. "I don't think I've ever really had a choice," she said softly. "I was born into a life of power, of control. My people used me as a tool, but they didn't teach me how to survive on my own. When everything collapsed, when the Zorth attacked, I had nothing left but to run. It wasn't about choice, it was about survival. And I guess, somewhere along the way, I had to learn how to fight for what little I had left." Jack nodded, understanding more than she knew. "I get that. I've been fighting my whole life, too. But it's different for you, isn't it? You didn't choose this. You didn't choose to lose everything." Zora's eyes flickered with something Jack couldn't quite place. "No, but that doesn't mean I haven't learned from it. Pain has a way of teaching you things. I learned how to survive. I learned how to keep going even when it seemed like there was no hope left. And now I'm starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could have something more. Something other than just survival. Jack's heart swelled with hope as he heard her words. For so long, he had seen Zora as a woman trapped in her past, afraid of what might happen if she ever stopped running. But now, he saw something different. She wasn't just a survivor anymore, she was someone who had the strength to rebuild, to find meaning in her life again. Maybe that's all any of us can do, Jack said, his voice soft. Just keep moving forward, day by day, until we find something worth fighting for. And I think you've found it. Zora turned to him then, her gaze locking with his. There was a depth in her eyes now, something that had been missing before. It was as if she had made a choice to let go of the past and embrace the future, no matter how uncertain it might be. You're right, she said softly. Maybe I have found it. Maybe I've found something worth fighting for. Jack smiled at her, feeling a weight lift off his chest. He had always known that Zora was stronger than she realized, but now he saw it in her eyes. She had found the strength to move forward, to let go of the fear that had controlled her for so long. And he was proud of her for it. As the night wore on, the camp settled into quiet. The squad had gathered around the fire, sharing stories and laughter as they ate their evening meal. Zora sat next to Jack, her presence no longer one of uncertainty, but of quiet strength. She had come a long way since their first meeting, and Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over him. The road ahead was still filled with challenges, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like they might actually have a chance at something more than just survival. As the firelight flickered in the distance, Jack looked over at Zora, who was smiling softly as she listened to the others. He knew there was still much to be done, still much to face, but he also knew that Zora was no longer just a princess, no longer just a victim of war. She was someone with a future, someone who was ready to fight for it. And no matter what happened next, Jack knew that he would stand by her side every step of the way.